I would like to critique the concept of the good enough mother. It's an extremely popular psychology concept that's out there today, saying a mother doesn't have to be perfect. All you have to be is good enough. Good enough for your child, and your child will do fine. Well, I first critiqued this concept in an essay back in 2006, and I got a lot of flack for it when I talked about it with people. I remember people didn't critique the essay itself so much, but when I talked about it, especially with people who really liked Donald Winnicott, they really went at me. And they said, how can you critique him? You haven't even read his writing. And I said, well, actually, I have read his writing. And I actually read the book in which he first talked about the good enough mother concept. So I would like to quote from that book, just to start with. The good enough mother starts off with an almost complete adaptation to her infant's needs, and as time proceeds, she adapts less and less completely, gradually, according to the infant's growing ability to deal with her failure. This is from Donald Winnicott's 1951 book, Transitional Objects and Transitional Phenomena. So what is my critique? Let me take my glasses off and get focused. Well, the main critique that I have, it's not even necessarily about that quotation, but I'm going to get to that. The main critique is how the good enough mother concept is used and defended in our society. Basically how it's used and defended, how I've heard and seen it used, defended over and over again by parents, by mothers, not just by mothers though, by fathers too, because even Winnicott later started talking about the good enough parent to be more, well, inclusive as it were. And I agree with it. It should be more inclusive because I see the father's responsibility in raising a child as being equal to that of the mother. Well, the way that I don't like this concept being used is that it becomes so broad that essentially anybody, any parent, could be considered good enough. And often therapists, professionals, psychologists, people in the world, friends even say, oh, you're doing a good enough job. And the problem is what I've seen so often, in most cases, practically all cases, is the parents actually aren't doing good enough. But this concept is so loose that the idea that a parent who even remotely does a halfway decent job, a quarter of the way decent job, fails their child in all sorts of profound ways, radically neglects their needs, can still be called good enough. This concept lets parents off the hook for their bad behavior. And it lets parents off the hook for their bad behavior even as written. That is how the concept is formulated. That's how it was formulated by Winnicott. Winnicott, who was a pediatrician. He worked with lots of parents. He was also a psychoanalyst. He worked with lots of parents with little kids. He saw little kids. He saw the behavior. I don't know exactly what was going on in his personal life. I don't know what was going on in relation to him and his clients, his patients' parents. But I'm guessing, because I've seen it in my own life, having been a therapist myself, having had lots of friends who are parents, there's a lot of pressure in our world to give positive feedback to parents, to let them off the hook for their bad behavior. What I've seen is if you don't do that, if you tell a parent, you know, you're failing your kid. You're failing your kid in all sorts of ways, but that's kind of what you have to do. You have to do that as a parent. And you still love your child. And don't worry, it's not going to affect your child that much. In fact, as Winnicott formulates it, your failure is what your child needs. If you don't fail your child's going to grow up being needy. It's going to always be attached to you. Is never going to break off. Is never going to move on in the world. You're going to make your kid perhaps even narcissistic or worse, that you're spoiling them by meeting too many of their needs. You have to fail them. It's good that you're failing them. And to me, it's like, this is a ridiculous concept. It's backward. What this is letting parents off the hook for their bad behavior, for their abuse. And that is how it gets played out in our world. It's a carte blanche to say, you did good enough, you don't have to feel bad, you don't have to feel guilty as a parent for screwing up, you don't have to look at your bad behavior. Your child is resilient enough. And what's the proof? Well, your child is able to be functional in the world in some ways, is able to have some sort of relationships, romantic relationships in the world, is able to go to school, is able to work. And so what this comes down to for me also is critiquing people's healthiness, a child who's now grown up, simply based on their ability to function in society. Well, the reason I critique this is because so often, just because someone functions in society, this doesn't say anything about their internal healthiness. And often what I've seen is if people get too healthy, if they become too aware, if they're too connected to their feelings, if they're too critical of how screwed up the world is, they don't fit into the world. They necessarily might not be so functional. And also people who are screwed up in certain ways that are screwed up because of the screwed up ways in which they are raised, can actually fit in better into society. Certain ability to be dishonest, to be manipulative, to triangulate, to fake it, to have a false self. This can be, well, a very positive thing for surviving in our very screwed up world. And so what I've seen is that some children who actually learn how to compensate for how badly they were abused, rejected, and traumatized, who develop all these, well, very screwed up traits, these screwed up traits can actually help them become functional. And later on, everybody can say, oh, see, your mother, your father, they were good enough. They raised you good enough. And also, people who are very screwed up, because I've heard this a million times, often they themselves say it. They're the first ones to say, my parents raised me right. They did a good job. They were tough with me. Even they spanked me. They beat me. They rejected me in all sorts of different ways. They were harmful to me in all sorts of different ways for my own good. I've heard that a million times. I've heard therapists say this a million times. Oh, they loved you. They rejected you in all these different ways. It was out of love. It was for your own good. They were good enough. Well, basically what I see, to kind of summarize this first part of my argument, is that the good enough parent often is good enough to raise a kid who is functional but screwed up, functional but neurotic, traumatized but emotionally split off, who is fake and false but is able to fit in to our fake and screwed up world in such a way that they don't raise attention. Well, now to get into the deeper analysis that I have about the good enough mother. Really, is it okay that a parent rejects their child? Actually, is the rejection by the parent of the child something that is necessary for the child's psychological development? That's a key part of the good enough mother concept, that actually the parent has to reject their child in certain ways, gradually, according to the child's developmental level. And if they don't reject that child in certain ways, if they don't fail that child, to use Winnicott's words, that child's going to have more problems later on. So actually, part and parcel of raising a healthy child is neglecting them. Basically what they're saying is being a bad parent in some ways is actually being a good parent. Well, isn't that kind of like double talk? Isn't that saying the opposite? Things that actually contradict each other? And that's my experience. Yes, it actually is. Because what I've seen in parents that are better than others, better than average, is that the more they actually meet their child's needs, the more their child begins to break away naturally. They don't break away as the result of the parents' failures. They break away as the result of the parents' successes at meeting their needs. Because what happens is the child grows out of their need to have the parent continue to meet their needs as they get older. And maybe I should state it in the opposite way. What I've seen is that when parents fail to meet their child's early needs in various ways, the child's needs actually stick around. The child realizes, oh my God, I can't get my parents to meet my needs. They'll try in all sorts of different ways, but eventually, yes, they gradually do adapt, like Winnicott says, to their parents' failures. But what happens is that doesn't make them healthier. That doesn't make them grow up to become healthier people and ultimately healthier adults. What it means is that they actually have to split off. They have to dissociate from those basic needs of theirs. They have to split them out of their consciousness. They have to stop consciously fighting for them. And instead, what they do is they grow up to be older children, adolescents, and ultimately adults who still have those needs. And they try in all sorts of different ways to get other people, in one level, to make up for those needs, but at another level, to actually meet the needs that were never met. So what happens is when parents fail their children grow up to become adults who still have unresolved ancient historical childhood needs that they're trying to get others to meet. And that's the fundamental part of what makes adults really screwed up. Also, they become parents not infrequently who actually use their own children to meet their unresolved needs. And in so doing, they fail to one degree or other, often to a great degree, to meet the needs of their children. And then they can turn around and say, but I'm a good enough parent because my parent was a good enough parent. They can rationalize their own bad behavior through this concept. So, to get back to it, in my conclusion, the best idea I can have for a parent is that they fully, to the best ability that they can, ultimately to the highest degree if possible, meet all the needs of their children, meet all the age-appropriate needs of their children. And as their child grows, the child will eventually want to go and explore the world more. The child will want naturally to become independent from their parent because they don't need someone who's meeting needs that are age inappropriate. As they grow, children naturally become more curious about the world. They break away from their parents, not because of their parents' failures, but again, because of their parents' successes. And what I've seen again and again on the continuum of healthiness is people who are healthier, children who are healthier, have healthier parents who meet more of their needs. And when parents meet more and more and more of their children's needs, their children grow and mature on an emotional level. Much more quickly, they break away and become more independent, they become more creative, they become more wild in a way, become more real, become more honest, fight for their needs more, and they become healthier adults. And in conclusion, the only other way I've seen that people can become healthier adults is to figure out how to meet their own unresolved needs. They have to figure out within themselves how to make up for the failures of their parents. And that's through healing their traumas, healing the bad things that happened to them, grieving their losses, and becoming the parent in their own life.